Welcome back to the Building a Clear, Authentic Brand podcast. I'm your host, Amy Dardis, and today I am so excited to introduce you to Matt Steinruck. Matt is a brand and culture guide, and he's the owner of Big Picture Consulting. He specializes in helping businesses, nonprofits, ministries zoom out to find their big picture so they can recover what's been buried. They can get a clearer sense of their own purpose and identity. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much.
So, Matt, you recently have kind of made a shift into this brand identity space, but that's not actually where you started, is it?
No, there's been a sort of a intentional shift that I've been trying to make over the past couple of years, but I tell people I've been making stuff for my career. I'm a designer, I guess by training. That's what I've been doing maybe for about 30 years. I've been making everything from print, slides, websites, whatever. I tell people, if you have specs for it, I can design it. So I've been in that space of making things for people whenever they need them. People will typically come to me and say, I need a whatever it is. And so I'll make that thing. But because of a lot of different things that have happened over the course of time, it became, I guess, increasingly more frustrated with working as a freelancer for sure. It became very fragmented, and I'd realized that what I do naturally is basically rebrand for people anyway. When somebody comes to me with a website, for example, they say, I want to make a website. And I would say, great, what are we working with? What are your pictures and what are your messages? Because putting together anything, website, print piece, whatever it is, I say it's just putting together a puzzle. The puzzle pieces are your pictures and your words. It's what you say. It's what you look like. And if you take all those puzzle pieces and you put them all out on the table and face up, it becomes a ton easier to actually assemble that thing. But invariably, when I looked at the messaging, it wasn't connecting to their audience. It wasn't connecting in the right way. It wasn't selling them well. And I started thinking, man, you know what? Let me just reshape this for you a little bit. Let me figure out how to say this for you in a little bit better way. And invariably, I basically just wound up doing some fast rebranding projects for people and started to realize that, this brand thing, this messaging thing, this identity thing was sort of at the headwaters of everything. It's where everything starts. So rather than do it quickly in the course of design, right in line with everything that we're trying to do, why not make that more official and hop in and let that be sort of a core thing to help people start with, to realize that what they really need to do is focus on their brand and their identity so that everything else that gets produced beyond that becomes a lot easier and a lot more effective.
How long do you feel like it took you to kind of start to make those observations of that connection between the identity and the brand?
That's a good question. I think it started to come over the course of a couple of years as I started to evaluate how I was working. For a while, I was just head down making things in the course of what I would do. I think I finally started to kind of come up and see the big picture for myself and understand what was going on and how I could do this in a much more effective way. And so it was probably, it's hard to identify and pinpoint. It probably happened over the course of a year or two, maybe a few years ago. Then things kind of began to evolve out of that as I started to say, I could probably work in a little bit different way as I've named my business Big Picture a long time ago. I think realizing that that's the way that I think, that's the way that I see things in a big picture. I always had this tendency just to say, hey, let's stop and zoom out and understand the context. And so really living into that and adopting that as a concept for myself and something that I could apply both to myself and for other people more officially, I think that's become a more recent thing over the last few years.
When you first got into branding and graphic design and web design, was that something that you intentionally pursued, or was it something that just ended up happening?
I went to school as an art major, and so I actually graduated. Technically, I'm certified to paint, but I never really sort of found a style or anything that I was really leaning into heavily. It was just something that I'd always knew that I wanted to do something in art because I was always drawing. I was always making things even when I was a kid. So I'm like, well, I think I want to do something in this space, something visual, something to, bring these things to life. So I went to school for that because that's kind of what I knew. And that was all that was available. And it was during college that computers and computer graphics were just kind of being introduced. And there was a course on campus that helped, that actually made a magazine for the town. And so they, through the actual course, you would take the course and they would come and say, we need people to take the course, to write the articles and sell the ads and create the layout and all that kind of stuff. So as an art major, they were looking for somebody with an artistic background to come in and make the magazine. So I came in and did that and didn't know anything about it. I'd never really touched a computer. I had maybe like one computer graphics class in college. And I asked a ton of questions and I created my first 40-page full color magazine on a Macintosh SE30, which, if you know anything about that, that's the ones with the 9-inch black and white monitor that has a 40 megabyte hard drive. That was what I did back then. And I just realized in that sense, you know what, this is, you know what, I think I could, I like this. I think I could maybe even earn an income at this. And that was sort of the beginning of getting me into design. I got my first job in a design studio in '94, and everything since then has been digital design, layout, graphics creation, things like that.
Did you know you wanted to be an entrepreneur?
No, that was never in my background or history at all. That's not part of my family, not part of my DNA makeup. I've worked for people for most of my career. So I have been with 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, 5 companies employed. And it was through circumstances and events that kind of moved me out onto my own. And even at that point, I was, kicking up the job search the way that everybody does. You do the resume thing. A friend said, hey, you know what? You need to just hang a shingle. Just start getting some food in for your family. Search out there to do some contract work. So I did. And found a little bit of work, and God just kept bringing more. And I just kept doing that. And sometimes it was a lot. Sometimes it was a little. So we've said for 10 years, God's been bringing us manna. He's provided what we need. And so I just I do what comes along. And sometimes I don't even really consider myself an entrepreneur. I'm doing what people ask me to do, and I do work, and they give me some money, and we're okay. And I'm starting to really rethink though how I approach that and how I can approach what I do in a better, more official way to set up in a capacity that serves both others and myself and our family in a stronger way. So I think the entrepreneurial thing is, at this point, I feel like it's where I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoy being in that space, but it definitely comes with its pros and cons.
It does. It's definitely a roller coaster ride. I feel like entrepreneurship for me has definitely taught me to live a life trusting in God, because there isn't that safety or that security. And it really does come down to like, okay, God, do I trust you? Do I trust you to lead me into this? And I really have to put my money where my mouth is, walking that path. And it's not something I ever imagined for myself either. I didn't even know business owners growing up at all. And to end up walking that journey, I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful for it. Clearly, it was part of God's plan for me, but not something I ever would have imagined or sought out.
Very much likewise. And I will tell you, it's sort of been a mantra of mine for a long time. I've said, God's got my job. That's what I've said for a long time. Because through the early part of my career, after my first job, I never really looked for a job. I was invited to the next one and to the next one. A boss or leaders would say, I want you to come here now. And so I was God has kind of led me through this crazy career. And I'm like, God's really got this. Like, it's been really cool. But when I moved out of being in a job to where I am now, I said it was kind of like hopping from a cruise ship to a rowboat. And, you're in this space where it's a little bit harder and it's a little bit scarier, and you're feeling all the bumps and bruises a little bit more. And as things kind of wound their way through that space, it's really been a significant test of faith. And I've felt God say, okay, let's see how much you really mean that in terms of God's got my job, and let's walk this out and see where it goes from a lot to a little, and from seasons of a decent pipeline to seasons of, I don't know what's coming next. And then more recently, even through a journey of a pretty deep wilderness and a desert season of some deep self-exploration and discovery. And so there's been a lot of faith tests and getting closer to myself and to God, and how this is all working at the same time.
What have you learned about your own wiring? I mean, starting out in design and kind of taking this artistic approach, and then realizing over time that you were able to see the bigger picture, even being able to recognize that. Is that something you were always aware of, or have some of these giftings been being developed through this journey?
I think it's a little both. And I think there's been, when you walk through such a weird, such a diverse set of experiences and needing to wear a lot of hats and needing to learn everything from big major national businesses, nonprofit, small businesses, solopreneur, you learn a lot. And I've gotten to do everything from strategy to execution. I've had my hands deep in the weeds. I've seen big picture stuff. There's a lot of stuff that I've known about myself, but there's been a lot of areas of deep discovery and understanding things that have already been there, as well as, oh, that's a new skill set to add and some things. So I think I've always been pretty self-aware, but I've been trying to become more self-aware, exploring not just like, oh, I know I can do all of these things that could put on a resume, but what does that mean about myself? And not only the skills that I can bring to somebody, but really what are the ways I operate and the ways that I see and the ways that I think, and just some of the ways that I am that I think could lend themselves to help other people. A couple of things that come to mind immediately when it comes to that sort of self-exploration. There's a couple models that do this. Somebody recommended something called Ikigai, which is these 4 circles that come together. There's another one called the groundhog experience that somebody does, which is 3 circles coming together. But in essence, it's looking at some key things about things that are true about you in the world that form that center spot of what's ideal. Like what are you really, really born to do? So the Ikigai way of doing it, it's a Japanese thing of saying, what does the world need? What are you really good at? What can you get paid for? And then there's like one other thing. I mean, you find the confluence of all those things, like that's your sweet spot. Like that's what's really real. That's what you're born to do. And one of the things that I realized for myself is that I really want to make a difference for people. I really want what I do. Like I know it's moving the needle. I know it's made some significant difference. And I've thought for a long time, this is kind of what evolved me into this. It's like, I can make a brochure talking about your business. You can put it on your desk. Maybe it does something, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. I don't know if it's moved the needle. I could even build a website for you. Even if it's a really good business driver, sometimes it's difficult to tell. Like, did that help you? I'm not sure. But as I've kind of zoomed back from this and realized like one of the biggest, putting all the pieces together, I want to know that I've made a difference for a company in the way that they think and operate, how they understand themselves, something that's for the top down, that they have a new awareness and a new aha moment that is said, you know what, this floods into everything else we do. It changes the way that we message and communicate. It changes the way that we operate internally. It really has transformed a key significant problem in our business. So as a problem solver, I think that's one of the things that I've identified about myself is I want to help. I want to make a difference. I want to solve a problem and move the needle in the way that somebody operates in their world.
So when you are looking at this process, or you're looking at a brand or a company and you're kind of walking them through this process, how are you doing that, or what are you looking for?
I think one of the biggest things that I start looking at, even from a qualifying standpoint, is what's the problem? Do you have something that you've identified in your business that is a struggle or a pain point or something that you wish were different or better? And sometimes that's hard to articulate, especially we talk about brand all the time. Sometimes I come and I go about how much I want to talk about brand, because sometimes it's this weird concept that people don't really get. Most of the time you say brand and people think logo, color palette, and fonts. It's, very people identify it with an identity to say, sometimes you say brand and people think, oh, you're rebranding like, Jaguar or Cracker Barrel or whatever. I'm like, we don't want that at all. Sometimes it has a negative connotation. But coming at it from a standpoint of what are you experiencing? What problems are you feeling in your business? And let's see if we can trace that back to some level of an identity issue. Like, what's going on there? What I try to not do, or what I try to advise people against, is sort of steering away from that core felt need. When somebody comes and says, I want a website, let's say, okay, why? Why do you want a website? What's going on? What do you think? What problem are you experiencing that you think a new website would solve? In fact, I have the domain called don'tredoyourwebsite.com, which is basically just a landing page to help people kind of think through that process to identify, like, it's not your website that's the problem. If you really trace it back, There's something else going on. And if you fix from the top down, we can do a lot more. I tend to want to look for problems that I can solve, that I can trace back to something that I can help identify and impact through a brand reframing.
People redoing their website is also what got me on to this path as well, of meeting with clients and them redoing their website and then learning that they were struggling with messaging, they were struggling with understanding their audience. And the reason their website wasn't working was because they couldn't articulate what they were doing, why they were doing it, who they were serving, and then building a website in a way that served that purpose. And I saw that over and over and over again. And I was like, my gosh, this isn't about the website. The website is the symptom, but it is
Exactly.
your identity that is the root. And I started to see that a lot of solutions out there, marketing solutions, lead gen solutions, website solutions, were all just surface level fixes, and they never really tackled the root problem. But teaching a business to understand the root problem is a journey all on its own.
Yeah, it is for sure. I think there's people. I was talking to a friend about this. We identified there's people who kind of get it and people who don't. Like there's people who really understand my brand needs help in their head. They kind of know it. There's another segment that I think takes some level of education to pull them into that space. There's a picture that I've been using for a long time. I feel like it helps people quickly understand the whole ecosystem and the whole way the whole cycle works. I put basically I have an educational picture of a water cycle where you have at the top of the mountain is brand. I call it the headwaters. So it starts there, and then when it melts and flows down off the mountain, that's design, brand design. Well, the visual artifacts to tell your story, whether it's a pamphlet or a video or a website or a slide deck or whatever, like that's all even your logo kind of flows out of that. That's where a logo comes in. That's not the top of the mountain. That's your brand design. And then once all that flows down off of there, there's a river. It flows down into the river. That's marketing. When somebody says, "Oh, you're in marketing," it's like, no, I'm not. Marketing is that carries all that stuff. That's the activation of your brand. That takes it out to your audience. It's figuring out who you're talking to and how to get to them, where they're listening. And, so there's all different kind of tributaries about where that goes, but that's marketing. And then I used to stop there, but I've realized I kind of drew the cycle back up into the air, something that another gentleman calls brand atmosphere. I've kind of labeled that as brand culture. That's where your brand intersects with your culture, and your culture internally is informed and driven by your brand. It's where your identity seeps back, it's woven back into the fabric of the culture of your organization, and you begin to think and make decisions and act and behave and do things that are synced up with who you believe that you are. You begin to live that out. And I've had an increasing passion for that as well, to help organizations connect to their culture, to their brand. But I think that's the ecosystem. So when somebody says, where does design come in? Where does marketing come in? Well, marketing, like you just said, marketing is an activation of your brand. And if your marketing sucks and you're having a really hard time connecting your Facebook ads to your audience, don't throw more money at your Facebook ads. Figure out, go back up to the top of the mountain and figure out why. Where am I missing? Where is my message not connecting to the people out there on the front end? Start all the way upstream, all the way at the headwaters, because that's generally where the problem lies.
Why do you think we struggle, business owners struggle, brands struggle with this core identity piece?
I think a lot of people haven't even really given it a thought. I don't think they really they probably don't take a minute to stop and kind of dig into it or let themselves do that. My guess, my tendency is that people get into business, they start working a thing because they're like, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm good at. This is what I'm passionate about. This is what I think I can do. And they just start doing it because that's just who they are. And then business, I call it operational sediment. It's just the layers of stuff that happens over time, and they just have to go and go and go, and they just race forward, but they never really take the time to stop and think about, who am I really? Who are we really? let's take some time to define this and figure out if we can put some words and some articulation to who we actually are, and try and figure out how much that would impact the course of everything else. I think most people, if they, in their mind, when they think about it for 2 seconds, it feels really frilly and froofy and fluffy, and like that doesn't mean anything. We need to make money. We need to just go. Let's go do our thing. We need to show up at work every day and make the thing and do the stuff and take care of our staff. But stopping to think about, who am I? Like it feels like it doesn't really have an impact. It doesn't have an ROI. So I think it's really hard for people to kind of take a minute, step away from this operational sediment, give themselves the time to think about it for 2 seconds, whether they're doing it themselves or they bring in somebody else to help. I think it's really challenging.
Do you think that if they were to take the time to do that, it's just a matter of time? Or do you think that when we try to do it ourselves, for ourselves, that in and of itself is a challenge?
I think that really depends on the person. I think it depends on the leader, depends on the situation. I think some people are really self-aware and they might have the tools and the ability to do it. But I also think that it's hard to see the label from inside the bottle, right? So
hard.
It really is. So I think you have to have a huge degree of self-awareness, maybe some tools, maybe a little bit of training, a really good thought process, being able to ask really good questions and know who to ask them to be very honest and transparent. But I think it probably takes a lot more time.
There is this, going back to this idea of wiring and natural gifting. You are a big picture thinker. You naturally want to zoom out. You naturally want to ask these deep questions, which leads into this gifting to be able to look at identities and find the patterns and help them walk through that journey. But if you have a lot of leaders that's just not their gifting. You know, their gifting is running great operations or building houses or serving clients. Their gifting is there. And so it's not sometimes even a matter of you just need to figure it out or you just need to be better. Sometimes it's work with someone who has that natural wiring to help you figure that out. Just in the same way, I would not go build my own house. No one would want that. I wouldn't want that. I would hire someone who knows how to build houses to build my house. And I used to get frustrated with this idea, and sometimes I still get frustrated and I have to check myself to be like, why don't people get this? Why don't people take the time to figure this out? But then I also am always talking about wiring and realizing like, oh, I'm taking for granted like how I process information and just assuming that other people should be able to process it this way as well, when that's not fair, nor I think is that the way God intended it for it to be.
No, I think that's true. I think what I hear you saying is one of the is for one of the core initial things that we would always challenge our clients with. And one of the very first things is, who are your clients and what is their problem and how do they think? And so sometimes it's easy for people in our space to talk all in terms of our jargon and the things that we say, and you need a brand identity refresh and things like that. But to realize, who are we talking to and what are their day-to-day issues and what are their problems and how can we speak in a way that helps them to identify that the thing that they're feeling is actually, it's the thing that I can help with, but you're not going to respond to my jargon. You're not going to respond to marketing language, because I think even in our industry, all of our language gets thrown around too much. We don't even understand what it means. Everybody has a different understanding of what the word brand means and marketing means. It's like, oh my gosh, this is just ridiculous. So coming into a client's world, coming into their space to say, where's your head at? What are your problems? What are you experiencing today? Just don't even talk about marketing or whatever. Just like, what are you feeling? Then trying to kind of come alongside them and say, I think what you're sensing there is something that is really at the core is an identity issue. And so, yeah, it's probably one of those lessons number one in sort of physician heal thyself. It's like, how can we come and identify with our clients the way that we want them to identify with their clients?
Do you feel like going through this identity process for your own business has been easy?
No, it has not. The process that I've kind of been working through, unfortunately, not sort of taking my own advice in that either, because I feel like I'm an identity expert. That's what I'm supposed to be able to do. So I have been able to, or I've been trying to see the label from inside my own bottle. And so I've kind of been working on a bunch of stuff myself and working through a bunch of self-exploration and self-identity. And I think I've been able to kind of get to some pretty decent places, but it's taken a long time. I feel like sometimes I've often thought, man, I wonder what would happen if I were to give my own identity over to someone else to help them walk me through this the way that I help other people through this. I mean, a lot of times a doctor might want to go see another doctor, even just to get a second opinion. You know what I mean? So I think that I think it's wise to do, even if they can self-diagnose themselves. So I've been pushing through my own journey, but it has taken a while. I think, to your point as well, I think we talked about this before. I might be on iteration, who knows what, of my own website, building my own thing. It's because I'm like, I can do this. I'll put up another one really quickly to kind of refresh identity 2026 this year. But I think it's been hard and frustrating, but I think also the iterations have taught me a lot and have given me an interesting pathway to look back to find out, where have I come from and why am I here? And I think even part of that, as I reflect on it, is that there's this awareness that an identity isn't something that's set in stone. It changes, and it should change. I mean, you should evolve, you should move, for a number of things, whether it's just because you've changed or the market has shifted and you need to kind of pay attention to what's going on out there. I think some level of an identity exploration it's an evolution. Hey, let's check up on this in 5 years and find out, like, where are we? Like, what's changed? So continuing to allow your identity to evolve. Like, I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And so identities move ahead. And so allowing ourselves to bend and flex and explore along the way and letting our businesses adapt, I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. I also have struggled with looking at myself, my own identity and my own journey. And I've honestly said the same thing, where I'm like, man, I wish somebody like me could just come in and do what I do for other people, because trying to do this for myself is exhausting. Like, I feel like it is so hard. And I think there's value in having some external guidance, some wisdom, somebody else looking into my life to say, I see this in you. I was even taking a behavioral assessment the other week, and I was being asked these questions, and my husband was in the room next to me and he was reading the questions, and here I am, like, hemming and hawing about which one I am, and he's like, you're this one, you're this one. And I was like, oh, thank you. But just because he has a different perspective into my life, and he's not in my head. Whereas, I mean, I do the same for him. If he were going through the personality behavior assessment, he would also be hemming and hawing about his own answers. And I would be like, you're this one, you're this one. And I think that's so helpful. And I think it's so necessary. But I think there's a part of the struggle of the journey of going through this myself and failing in so many ways and struggling in so many ways that has helped me, and maybe you've experienced this too, but be able to better relate to what somebody else is going through and why it's so hard and why they feel so stuck, because you've experienced how hard it is. And I think there's power in that. A lot of times our greatest pain becomes our most powerful message, because it's the things that we've had to walk through ourselves in order to be able to ever speak into somebody else's journey about, what they could do differently.
No, I think that's totally true. It's that, not to take it too far out of context, but I think it's that 2 Corinthians principle, right, of comforting others with the comfort that we've received ourselves. So whether that's comfort, whether that's guidance, like you've learned something, you've walked through a thing, whether I've walked through it 5 years ago or whether I've walked through it 2 minutes ago, to turn back around and say, hey, let me take you through this thing that I've just been through. It adds power to it. It adds empathy to it, allows you to see, just to connect to that and to them on a different level. So I think it definitely adds a layer as a guide if you've been through something yourself.
I have been finding more and more that sometimes it's not even the fact that we do have it all figured out, but it's the willingness to just share what it is that we have been going through, that one can help people feel more willing and more comfortable to have that conversation, to open up, to be willing to explore. Because when we're talking about identity, we're talking about some very, that's some deep stuff, right? Talking about your marketing strategy and your lead gen strategy, that's one thing. People can do that all day long. But to talk about identity, to talk about what you're struggling with, that takes trust, that takes vulnerability. And that's a place a lot of entrepreneurs and business leaders don't really want to go. So how do you find yourself kind of navigating that?
Good question. I think navigating that personally or navigating that with other people, probably all the above.
Both.
Yeah. Gosh, for me, it's been just a ton of deep exploration and facing my own fears, facing my own struggles and hurdles. Something that I've been learning recently is really looking at fears and what they mean, what they mean, not long term, but long from, deep in your past. Where are things rooted? What's going on? Why do you feel stuck? A lot of the reasons that you feel stuck are because of fear. 99% of us operate out of some level of fear. Mm-hmm. So it's either some level of self-protection or self-preservation or self-promotion. And a lot of those are out of some level of fear that keeps us rooted and stuck in where we want to go and prevents us from taking that next step. And so I've really needed to, look up very deeply to figure out in some of the areas where I'm feeling stuck and moving ahead, what's really going on and what does that mean in my identity and how can I live much more in a connected identity that God's called me into. So there's been a lot of that for me personally. And the season of moving through this as a solopreneur has probably been one of the hardest ones that I've ever faced. I have been through levels of fear, anxiety. My wife, God bless her, has been so great at kind of walking through this stuff with me. And we've kind of gone back and forth. There's been moments where I've been great and let's go and everything's fine. And then there's been moments where I've kind of been, in a crumpled mess. And so we kind of play off of each other back and forth in that. And I've talked to several solopreneurs who are in very similar situations as well. But I think as I think through my core level of wanting to make a difference in someone's pain, in someone's difficulty and the problems that they're facing as a business, that inherently raises the question, what are you facing? What is your pain point? What's going on? Where are you stuck? Where you feel like you can't move forward? And where's that coming from? So as we dig into that, sometimes it starts off at a business analysis. And it's weird because we feel like we're dealing with issues of just a brand. Oh, what's your brand? What's your, how do you put yourself out there into the world? But it eventually moves into some level of, business consulting where you're dealing with what's really going on, not just on a business level and a, ROI and your sales sheets and everything, but what's really going on under the surface that is keeping you stuck and prevented from moving ahead. And man, it's therapy. And I say that because I've had a couple of experiences where some of the clients that I've worked with have been through some brand exploration and they're like, man, nobody's ever asked me these questions before. This has felt like therapy. This has felt so cathartic to be able to explore this stuff and talk about this stuff and get it out into the open and move into areas where we haven't even given ourselves the opportunity to think it through. So combining and layering all of those things and just listening and asking good questions, but moving into areas where you typically don't move into, I think it is very therapeutic and can push in a good way people into some new spaces.
So you're finding that there is a connection between individual identity and brand identity.
Yeah, I think so. I think definitely so. I think it's natural. I think it's really not only natural, I think it's very common and maybe should be looked at even more so. Mm-hmm. I'll go here. One of the things that I do a lot, I have a sort of a magic question that I enjoy asking in my brand explorations that I was very curious about at one point. I was curious about it for myself. And I decided to layer it in with my brand exploration. And the question that I was curious about for myself was, what makes you cry at movies? I thought it was a really interesting question because there's different movies where every once in a while we're just like, oh, there it is. It got me again. I know it's coming. I've seen this movie 100 times or there's a show or whatever. It's just all of a sudden, it's just man, what is that? What is going on there? What is it that makes you cry at movies? And I thought if you can find that thread, it tells you really something interesting about yourself. If you can find that thing, that theme that suddenly makes your heart leak out of your eyes, there's something inherently true about you that moves you as a person. And when you find that theme, you often find as a founder, if you're talking to a leader, a business leader, the person who's in charge of a brand, that theme also very likely will tie into their brand, the reason that they started their business, why they are in the place that they are. And so whether it's restoration or hardship or I think it's different for everybody, finding that theme that is deep within the heart of a person is very likely one of the biggest reasons that they started a business to move into that area of helping the world and impacting the world. So I'm really fascinated in that space of tying in that personal journey and the deep heart of somebody into why they started their business and how we can make their brand resonate and tell the story of who they are as a person and why they are who they are. Long way to answer, yes, I think there's a deep tie-in with personal journey and how a brand represents itself.
Why do you think having that clarity around identity, or even around brand identity, you said you wanted to do something that moves the needle, and we've talked about how having this clarity helps you with your marketing assets and your marketing message, but even deeper than that, what are you seeing as why brand identity ends up being the core of how a business operates?
It goes back to, I think, that Simon Sinek message of the why. Everybody likes to talk about the why.
Love
it's
that.
like that's your why. Like that's the heart. That's the thing that makes your heart leak out of your eyes. It's like that. It's when you understand that and own your identity and you just live into who you are and you're just comfortable in yourself, I think everything else becomes easier. Everything else just becomes, you're not trying to borrow somebody else's identity. You're not trying to live out something that it doesn't feel natural to you. You're not trying to put Saul's armor on David. It's like, this is who I am. And I'm going to go out and work in the way that I'm comfortable with, the way that we operate. This is who we are. This is how we make decisions, and it's going to impact everything else in our business. It makes everything else flow more smoothly.
I went through years of running our agency of not having that stuff figured out. One, not knowing really myself very well as a person or what I really stood for, how I operated, or what I valued. And that carried over into our business. And we were constantly looking at what everybody else was doing. What are they doing? And what are they doing? And what are they doing? And thus, 50,000 iterations of our website and our offers and our messaging. And over time, all of that back and forth ended up really breaking down my own confidence as a human. It was detrimental. One website redo didn't seem all that bad, but 10 years of redoing your website 20 times a year, it's pretty detrimental because you get to a point where you're like, what am I doing? Why do I keep doing this? And what do I even stand for? I can't even trust myself to know what to do anymore. It was like I didn't have any confidence to move forward. And that's where that was a wake-up call for me to realize that this is not sustainable. And I'd put all this effort into trying to figure out my brand and my business. And I ended up finding out that the key to figuring out my brand and my business was first figuring out myself. Have you found that to be the case for you and your clients?
Yeah, I think that's really wise. I think it sounds like there's a lot of focus on sort of an external thing, focusing on one of the things that I have fallen prey to a lot is this is what somebody else says that I should be doing. I'll spin up something and somebody says, oh, that's really good. You need to do that. Like, that's really good. The world needs that. And it's easy for them to say that and walk away, but then well, then I'll do that. Let me rearrange my whole world because of the thing that you said. Whether or not I feel like it's true or not, I think it's a really good idea because that's what everybody else says I should do. You take another course about, this is the right way to be doing LinkedIn. This is the right way to be doing all of the ads, and this is what everybody else is doing. And then you do that, and you're like, well, that doesn't work for me. So spending time to just dig into yourself. Like, what is true to you? Who are you really? Who are you called to? What is your purpose uniquely in the world? And I think that's beyond just simple value proposition. I think I'm beginning to think about that more. We say value proposition, like what makes your business unique? Because we always want to find that as branders. Like how can we position your business in a unique way that you're different from your competitors? I think that there's an even deeper route than that. Like, what makes you unique? How can we make your brand unique because of who you are as a person, because of who you are as a founder, and let your brand really represent something that's true to you? I think there's a really powerful thread there to pull on.
So you talk about this idea of self-exploration and just having to take that time to figure out what you stand for. Always sounds easier said than done. But in reality, what do you think that looks like, and how long has that journey even looked like for you? And I want to kind of dig into this idea of the struggle and the messy middle, and the idea that sometimes a lot of our deepest growth and all of these deepest self-exploration, I know for me, it came out of one of the ugliest, hardest seasons of my life, of the most failure, of the most obstacles, when it would have been easy to be like, oh, I'm doing something wrong, instead of realizing this is kind of what the journey looks like to get to the other side.
Now I think I'm in therapy. I think we're going the other direction. Yeah, it's not been an easy journey. It's been, I mean, you mentioned 10 years. I think it's probably been about 10 years this year that I've been a solopreneur, which is crazy to think that I've been doing things for people, making things for people. Hey, I need a new website and in that it's been a complete roller coaster. There's been a couple of years that have been really, really good, but there's been most of the time that it's been like, what am I doing? Like, what should I be doing now? What am I doing today? How can I do this better? I've never had an anxiety attack in my life until this last 10 years. I've experienced them in a couple different instances, and I'm like, oh, that's what that feels like legit. Like there's been some periods where it's been complete, just really, really challenging to figure out what the next step is going to look like. It's the faith journey has been wild, trusting that, God has the next thing for us. And I feel like how do I say this? I've made attempts to try to do this myself, to try and market myself. Like, hey, here's a new thing that I should spin up and put out because I've made a little bit of money in that, and I think the world could need this, and I put it out there, and it's been crickets. So I feel like it's been this weird, like, asking God, like, what do you need from me right now? And for a long time, that was in work, in like, what project do you need me to do? How do you want me to market myself? More recently, it's been a lot of, who do you need me to be? What do you need me to say or not say or do or not do that I'm not asking yet? There's been a lot of like, God, where are you in this? Feeling very deserty. Been leaning into a lot of, as I've been saying that a lot more, I've been leaning a lot more into that story of, the Israelites in the desert. And okay, let's look at that for a second. If I keep saying desert, if I keep saying, going through the desert or being led through the desert, what does that really mean? What did it mean for them? What do you need me to hear, understand as I kind of walk through this place? Because I don't think it's just, through it, I haven't really come to a place of saying, I've abandoned my faith, God's not here. I feel blessed that I've come out of a place of some really deeply rooted theology. And I really have a faith that grounds me. I've said all the time, like, God's got my job, and but I really have been pushed into a place of saying, what do you need from me right now? Like, what's going on? So, Israelites were in the desert, they were led by a pillar of fire. Like, God was always with them. They knew that, but man, they went through a hard time, and God was trying to evolve them through what they'd been through out of years of captivity and slavery, and in a headspace that was not their own, in a borrowed identity, in a place where they were like, and now they're in a place of saying, okay, now we're in this like new place of freedom, supposed freedom, but we're trying to wrestle between who we used to be for 400 years and who you're calling us into. Like, we want to get to the promised land. Yeah, that all sounds great. Milk and honey. Yeah, get us there. But he was realizing, like, you're not ready to do that yet. There's a lot of things we still have to work on, formative, to get you to be able to live into that place successfully. And so, like, the message I feel like I've been getting is just trying to understand like how to come out of an identity that I've been in for a long time and some of the fears of my past and the hesitations. How do I really seep into like this new space where I am in a desert season of understanding myself in a new way so that the next piece of my journey can be what it's meant to be, what he's called me to be, into that next place of purpose. And I don't think any of that's wasted. I think all of that formation is really, really intentional. I sense that God is with all of it and supports all of it and leads me through all of it. But it has been some days and weeks and years of some pretty deep stuff.
I love you, and you wrote an article about this, which I thought was phenomenal. I think you're a phenomenal writer. Like, you are just very good at communicating. Definitely a gift of yours. But you worded it so well about leaving. You leave as a slave, but your mindset is still stuck in slavery. And it's a process of learning to be free. And that doesn't change because you left your one location. And that we want to hurry up that process. We want to speed up that process. I know I would love for that to just happen in a weekend, like just God, just change my mindset. And then I realize how long it's taken. But then I look back and I'm like, I see that now. I see how angry I was. I see how stuck I was. I see how afraid I was. And I'm glad, that you're taking me through this process, because I wanted all these clients, or I wanted this new business to work. But I realize now I wasn't even ready for that. If clients had come at that time, I personally would not have been able to have the conversations then that I'm even having now. And I wish I could see that while I'm there, but it is that process.
It's a complete process, but everything is process. I mean, that's what we're about. And I think us going through the process and realizing that it's always about the journey. It's not about the destination. I mean, it's how to get there. It sometimes takes a while, and you can never tell somebody it's going to take this long because you just don't know. One of the things that has been a theme of learning, and I've heard this recently from a couple of other people, is contentment, and learning that about like how to just be okay where you are, how to not compare, how to realize that your journey is your journey and it's different from everybody else's journey. And there's no way that you're ever going to be like, I should be there. I should be here. The whole S word is always such a hard thing to kind of get rid of the shoulds and just kind of be where you are. And every time I think about contentment, I always have to go back to like the classic verse of Paul talking about, I found the secret to contentment. Like, oh, everybody's leaning in. Like, well, that's cool. Tell me that. And the things immediately preceding and immediately after are so weird to me because it doesn't almost sound like it fits. Because we put that. So he says, I found the secret to contentment. I've had a little and I've had a lot. I've lived with a ton and I've lived with very, very little. And I've found the secret to being content. I can do all things with Christ who gives me strength. And we put the second half of that on boards and we paint it and we put it in our house and it's really pretty. And we think, oh, that means that I can, whatever I want to do, I can do because God gives me the strength. He's like, no, that means I've been able to be content with very, very little or a lot, and really lean into that to say, just wherever God's called you to right now in your journey and your process, like you can do that because Christ has given you the strength to do it. And like, man, that is a hard context to sit in, but that's what that's about.
Do you ever think about the story of Joseph? That for me has been one of the stories that I go back to a lot, in the sense that God gave him this dream when he was young and pretty spoiled and pretty arrogant and, at the beginning. And then what he takes him through. I think about Joseph sitting in jail for 12 years. And in that jail, there was nothing he could do to release himself. He couldn't try harder. He wasn't digging an escape. Like, he wasn't trying to make the escape happen. He 100% was fully reliant on God. And I think there must have been something happening in Joseph's heart and character for 12 years in jail. That must have been part of his preparation for then saving Egypt and leading them through a famine and stepping into the dream that God had given him years and years ago. And I think as a young entrepreneur, having dreams of, God, I feel like you're calling me to this, but every time I step into this, it's a train wreck. It seems like it's door shut, door shut, door shut. But then realizing that, yeah, maybe that dream is from God. Maybe it is something that you have to keep believing in. But at the same time, knowing you are not the one to make it happen. And God cares more about your character and who you become through this process than he does what you're able to produce or achieve in the process. Has that story ever stuck out to you like that?
No, not yet, but it has sort of, I was kind of resonating with it now, and I like it a lot because you don't think about the timing of how long he had to sit in jail and do nothing. And we say, nothing in quotes. I mean, it's really profound. Because that waiting period, somebody just told me about a book yesterday about I can't remember the name of it, but it's something about what you do while you're waiting. And there's an acronym to the word wait and what you can do in these seasons where there's really nothing else you can do, where it seems like there's nothing else you can do, and how to wait actively, how to use your time wisely. Like if he was in the cell for 12 years, like what can I do? What can I do to ground myself or improve? I don't even know what you do at that point because you're completely sort of powerless. But how do you use this waiting period with a time where there's intention and whether you're improving yourself or you're actively doing something in your world? Because I know there's times where God says like, I need you to act. This is the old, God can't see your parked car sort of a thing. I mean, he can obviously, but there's times where like he'll say to someone in the Old Testament, like, why are you praying? Like, get up and go. Like I told you, like, you shouldn't be here. You should be like going out and doing something. So there's that weird tension of like how to wisely use the time at your disposal to do whatever you sense God's calling you to do. But I also think about that period of Joseph where like at what point would he ever felt like, maybe I didn't hear that. Maybe that thing that thought I heard a long time ago, maybe that wasn't, because this can't be it. Like this can't be it. Like, so the periods of doubting as well to feel like, what's going on? Did I really hear from God, or was that just like a figment of my imagination? Like that, I'm sure that could definitely be a thing. You're nodding because it sounds like you may have felt that as well.
For sure. I'm just fascinated by. I wish there was context and insight into Joseph's life in jail for all that time and why it required all that time. But it must have required all that time. I mean, there was clearly a reason, but it also reminds me of just sometimes it's not about what we need to do to make things happen. I mean, there is that, get out of the boat, step into the river, act on faith, but then also knowing that we don't make nearly as much things happen as we think that we do. I mean, and when I look at my life, like if I were to actually look back, and I do this a lot, I do see that, wow, I didn't make that happen. I didn't make that happen. I didn't make that happen. Like that was in God's timing, that a door opened, that a connection was made, that an opportunity happened. Most of the things that I've learned and experienced along the way were not even ever conscious. I was just living my life, and only in hindsight was I able to look back and be like, oh, wow, I learned all these things from that. And I didn't even realize it at the time. And so now here as an entrepreneur, I'm trying to stress about making things happen or being where I need to be. But that hasn't been the trajectory of my life up until this point. Like if I actually look at all the things that ended up, I feel like being pivotal weren't my doing.
That's a really interesting observation. That's been very likely true because we stress and struggle to try and do things the way everybody else around us says that we should do them. And it's that weird tension of like, okay, what should I do today? Like if I, like what's the plan and purpose that I have, and how can I step into it in a way knowing like this is what God's got for me? And then when do I just step back and say, okay, you got to just kind of lead me where you need me to go. And God doesn't care about my timing. It's all in whatever he's going to do. I don't think about Joseph as much as I've thought about Moses and how he had this big thing that he was called to do. And then he's out in the desert for 40 years saying, well, I'm done. Like there's nothing else left for me. It's like, he's in the
Mm-hmm.
palace leading out of the Joseph story. He's in the palace and now he's all in the desert for 40 years. And then he's called back out into his ministry where he makes he's the whole next phase of his life and of, again, being in the desert and waiting and being formed and being trained and being ready for whatever his next journey is going to be. That is these big seasons of waiting and just kind of letting God do what he's going to do and form us into who he needs us to be for the next season. I think it's really significant, but it's really uncomfortable because we have no idea how long we're in this space.
And I want to dive into just one more thing here before we wrap up, and that's this waiting and being formed, but being formed and coming into this acceptance, love, realization, boldness of claiming your own identity, like your own wiring, like into how God actually made you, and not trying to be somebody else or do it the way somebody else does, but really like embracing that. What does that look like for you?
What does it look like? What is it going to look like? I don't know. I don't know if I've been there yet. I think I'm still walking that out. I think there's still some of
Perfect.
that process that's still happening. I don't know. I don't know if we get there. Sometimes I look at people, I'm like, oh, you're there. You've done that. And they'll probably say, no, I'm still trying to figure that out myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like I'm closer today than I was yesterday. I feel like I'm, have more tools around me, more self-awareness around me, and more ability to get there than I have had in the past. And I think I'm getting there, to wherever that is, more closely. I think one of the things that what am I missing? Sometimes I ask myself that, like, what's still in front of me that I feel like God's calling me to that I haven't quite done or heard or stepped into. If I were to do like the next thing, I think there's a couple key questions that God's kind of calling me into, which are, what am I afraid of?
Mm-hmm.
What are the biggest things that I feel like are the fear hurdles in front of me that are preventing me from being more fully connected to what his plans are for me? And
Mm-hmm.
if I were to really look at those fears, what do those mean about myself and how I view God and how I kind of line up with him and who I believe him to be? And how can I put more truth into those situations to dispel some of those lies and some of those falsehoods and some of those fears? Because I think that's where some of the keys and connecting points are.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the next steps for me to overcome some of the gaps and hurdles that I'm feeling from an identity standpoint, is really looking into some of those key lessons I feel like God's calling me to.
Do you feel like you are fully connecting and aware of how God has uniquely wired you?
Am I connecting with that right now?
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm getting there, and I'm not sure if I'm fully there yet, but I'm starting to get more inklings of that idea. One of the things that I'm learning from somebody that I'm listening to a lot right now is God's unique name for you.
Mm-hmm.
And who he knows you to be. He uses the idea of Jesus as a shepherd. And I think he had an experience of being with the shepherd, and he had a whole flock, and he had a sound or a name or a way to identify each sheep in that flock. And he could like call that sheep and they would know exactly. He said, if Jesus were to walk into the room and call out a name, that you instantly could know that he was identifying you as a person, what would that be? Do you know what that is?
Mm-hmm.
Not like who you are, what you do, what your job is. Like, do you have like that name? And listening for things like that, leaning into what that is, understanding that, I think that's kind of when it starts to come down into some real significant identity connecting points.
Even in my few interactions with you, I have just been like awed by your insightfulness. Like you are so insightful. You are so articulate and good at communicating, and your ability to share your story to make people feel safe and you say this, and seen. And while I think you're going through this process of being seen yourself, I do think you have this ability to help other people and their own identities be seen, because you create this safe space for that to happen. And you help with the insight into being able to pull that out because you can ask questions, because you can see that big picture. And I am excited for you on this journey because I'm like, man, I feel like you're just on the cusp of God just doing some really cool thing, which he's already doing, right? He's already doing these really cool things, but it's so evident from an outsider's perspective looking in and seeing this journey that you've been on that I'm like, man, there's calling here, there is gifting here. And it has been, I think, God needing you to become who he created you to be and to fully step into that and know you the way that he's wired you brings value to how he wants you to engage and connect with people and businesses. And I think that's so exciting. It's so exciting that this journey you're on, and not to say that I'm not on this journey, I am too, but it's also easier to look into your life than it is to look into mine.
Thank you. You're very, very kind to make those observations. It's something that tough to see from the other side sometimes, but I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I am so glad that you joined us today and you were willing to share. I thought that was so encouraging and so authentic, which is my heart for relationships and obviously for this podcast too. But for people to follow you, connect with you, you are active on LinkedIn at Steinruck, and then Big Picture Consulting for his business. And I'll put those in the show notes. But that is all for us today. We'll see you guys next time.